This is CSIS Online. Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think I need to point out how important Iraq is to the stability of the Middle East and the region, and to creating a future structure in the Middle East. This afternoon, we're presenting the results of work being done on Iraq's Opinion Thermometer. It's a long-range project aimed at assessing the state of public opinion in Iraq towards both democracy and the overall level of governance in the country. The goal of this project is to determine whether the state of public opinion in the country is on a trajectory that is conducive to a sustainable and well-functioning pluralistic democracy. We have two experts that will be presenting this result. One is Dr. Munqith Dagher. He's a senior associate with the Burke Chair in Strategy here at CSIS. He also is the CEO and founder of the Independent Institute of Administration and Civil Society. That's a research group in Iraq, and he is also a Gallup International Board member. Dr. Karl studies at the University of Akron. His research focuses on political violence, counterterrorism, and security policy. And he's conducted research studies in quite a number of countries, including Iraq. Gentlemen, why don't we go ahead?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you all tuning in today to listen to the results of our recently completed poll in Iraq that is really, as Dr. Cordesman said, part of a longer-term project that we call the Iraqi Opinion Thermometer. So if you look at the second slide that we have in our presentation, you can see the kind of general rationale and methodology that we use for the Iraqi Opinion Thermometer. And let me talk a little bit about our thinking, our motivation for getting involved in this project. We looked at this as a way to measure the health of Iraq's democratic political culture. We're strongly of the belief that you can't have a democracy without Democrats, and I mean that Democrats, small d. You have to have people who have attitudes, values, and motivations that are supporting democracy, not just the institutions of democracy. So as I said, this was meant to be a long-term project, not just a single snapshot, but a series of ongoing investigations of Iraqi public opinion over time that is meant to be systematic and consistent in the measures that we use. And there's a methodology that we have that we hope will make the data that we collect both accessible and understandable. So we try to encapsulate a complex set of opinions into some understandable numbers. So think along the lines of Transparency International's Index of Corruption, or think about Freedom House and the measures of political freedom that they have, things like that. We're trying to use this kind of same index methodology to allow people to understand what is going on in Iraq in terms of public opinion and support for democracy. So the index is really based on political science, thinking about the attitudes that are most important to supporting democracy in a particular country. And so we focus on 5 categories of attitudes that we think are particularly important for understanding whether people are going to be conducive to holding up democracy or are more likely to undermine democracy within a country. And so the 5 categories that we look at, the first one is satisfaction with life. And the general thinking here is that the more satisfied people are with their lives, the more likely they are to support the political status quo. So in a democracy, the more supportive people, the more satisfied people are with their lives, the more likely they are to be supportive of the democratic status quo. The second category that we look at is what we call satisfaction with governance. And so here we're measuring whether people are satisfied with the actual way that democracy works in the country. Are people seeing it paying off dividends to them? And then so obviously this measure comes with the hypothesis that the more people are satisfied with governance in their country, the more likely it is that they are to be supportive of the political status quo, in this case, democracy. But then we look at how people assess the functioning of democracy in their country. So it's not just how governance is happening, but are their voices being heard? Are people in a position to really make a difference in their country? So this is what we refer to as democracy.
Can you move the, excuse me, can you move the to the next slide, please? Yeah.
Thank you, Munqith.
Yeah.
So the fourth category is sectarian thinking, and this is something that's extremely important in Iraq. And the general hypothesis that we have here is that the more sectarian someone views politics, so in other words, the more sectarian their lens of viewing how things should be done in the country or how they view each other. So do they view themselves principally as a Sunni Iraqi or a Shia Iraqi or a Kurdish Iraqi, although Kurd is an ethnic group, not a sect. But the idea here is the more that people view each other in sectarian terms, the bigger the problem it is for democracy. So if people don't view each other in sectarian terms, don't view the political structure in a sectarian lens, they're more likely to be supportive of democracy. And then the final category is national identity. And so this goes to the idea, does a person view themselves primarily as a citizen of the country, or does someone view themselves primarily by some subnational category, tribe, occupation, once again, sect of religion, ethnicity, something like that. And the hypothesis here is the more that they view themselves as being a citizen of Iraq, the better that is for democratic stability in Iraq. And we've seen this over time. When Iraqis lose their sense of national identity and move more towards thinking in terms of subnational identities, it's destabilizing for politics. So this slide here shows the one we're looking at now is we've created a 1 to 5 index. So we call this an index of positivity. And a 1 equals a very high degree of positivity, and a 5, 1 is a very negative attitude, 5 is very positive. So the index scores for each attitude category tells us how supportive these particular pillars are at a particular time for democracy. So we create an average in each one of the categories. That's our index number, but then we take the average of all 5 categories to say overall, how supportive is Iraqi political culture of democracy, or is it suffering in terms of its support for democracy? So if we go to the next slide, this is what I call our bottom line up front slide. So this slide shows us the overall picture of how things are going in Iraq. The overall score for our opinion thermometer index for Iraq, and this survey was put into the field April through May 2021. The overall score is a 2.3 out of 5. That means, if you interpret that score, that means that Iraq's political culture at this time is not particularly positive for its democratic stability. So it leans towards the negative. And if we look at the 5 categories that make up our index of Iraqi political culture, life satisfaction, negative, in fact, very negative. Governance, negative. Assessment of democracy, negative. The rays of hope that we see, the kind of positive signs that we see, sectarianism is relatively low, so that's a positive thing for Iraq's democratic political stability, and national identity is high. So most Iraqis identify themselves first and foremost as Iraqis rather than with their subgroups, and that gives us a positive rating. So basically what this means is Iraqis are very unhappy with their life. They're very unhappy with how Iraq is governed. They're fairly unhappy with the state of democracy in Iraq, but they're not very sectarian in their views of politics, and most think of themselves as Iraqis first. So if we go to the next slide, life satisfaction, as I said a minute ago, this is a negative picture. Only 47% of Iraqis say that they are happy. Okay, and why does this matter? You may say, well, you know, they're unhappy with their family life, or they're unhappy with their job. What does this have to do with politics? Well, one of the things that we know is that people will frequently blame the government for their unhappiness. And we've seen this in multiple countries. This is not just an Iraqi phenomenon. This is true in many different countries, that the more unhappy people are, the more they want to challenge the status quo, even the political status quo, even though it may have a tenuous connection to their actual life. Unhappiness breeds instability. Now, on the right side of the slide, you see 3 questions that we put into the survey that asks about respect and dignity and life control. And we think these are important measures of how people basically think of themselves in society. Do they think of themselves as being people who have what we call significance? Or are they people who don't think they're significant, that they're not respected, people don't care about them? These numbers may seem fairly positive. You see 91% say they're respected, 91% say that they're treated with dignity, 75% say that they have control over their life. One of the things that we think is going on here with these numbers is that these numbers may actually reflect a social desirability issue in Iraq. That in Iraqi culture, it may actually not be considered, you know, the honorable thing to do to say, oh, I'm not respected, or I'm not treated with dignity. So we may be actually under measuring here how much people are actually positive about their sense of significance in society. When we do this survey the next time, Munqith and I would like to change the nature of these questions and maybe ask, do you feel respected by the government? Do you feel you're treated with dignity by the government? And do you think the government gives you control of answers to those questions? Okay, so then the next slide, this is life satisfaction having to do with social trust. And this is very, very important. One thing that sociology and political science and related fields have shown is that social trust is extremely important to a functioning society. If people don't trust each other, lots of different things in society don't function very well. And one of those things is democracy. Democracies only work when there's a significant degree of social trust, kind of a critical mass. What you can see from this slide is that Iraq has a real deficit in social trust. So I'm somebody who's done a lot of surveys in a lot of different countries around the world and interpreted the data. That 14% is extremely low internationally. So that means only 14% of Iraqis say they trust other people. that is a very big warning for Iraq's social cohesion and the future of its democracy. Okay. Okay. So here's a picture of how Iraqis are doing economically. Are they saving money, which means that their income's sufficient and for their needs and they can save some money? Are they just getting by? Or are they having to go in debt and they're having to spend savings? So what we're seeing is the majority of Iraqis are really not perceiving themselves to be doing very well economically. If you add up the numbers on the right, it shows that most are just getting by or they're having to spend money or borrow money. And so that too is an important measure for how Iraqis think about democracy. Is democracy or the present political system helping them economically? And I think most Iraqis are saying no, it's not. Okay. Now this next slide, I think, is particularly useful for understanding how Iraqis perceive themselves socially and economically. And one of the things that Munqith and I have discussed in the past is if you look at this information over time, you see that Iraq is eroding in terms of a society where people view themselves as beneficiaries of the political and economic status quo. So what that means is that more and more Iraqis are actually moving into the lower class and the lower middle class. The economic realities in Iraq have not only eroded how much income people have to spend, it's eroding people's perceptions of where they stand in the economic hierarchy in the country. And so part of how you can think about this is that this reflects to a degree whether people think of themselves as economic winners or economic losers of the status quo. And there's a lot of people in Iraq now who think of themselves as the economic losers from the status quo, not winners. Okay. Wait for this animation to do its thing. So I'll start talking about the first figure here. In the first figure, this is happiness in Iraq over time. And we can see that in 2014, 68% of the population said that they were happy. So think about that, 2014, that's at the height of ISIS. That's at the time when ISIS was threatening the country, yet 68% of the country said, we're happy. Look at that today, 47% of Iraqis say they're happy now. So clearly having a lot of instability in the country, having security threats is not the end all be all of where Iraqis think their happiness lies. The current political and economic situation and to a degree the security situation has really driven down the level of happiness in the country to 47%. So this is important to show the trend is downward. Iraqis are becoming much less happy over time. Then if we look at this divided up between the three major groups in Iraq, Kurds, Shia, and Sunnis, once again, we see the trajectory is downward. From 2018 to 2021, the trajectory is definitely downward. The most important thing, I think, in this second figure is where the Shia are in 2020. Because what that says is the Shia are very unhappy with the status quo. And why is that important? The Shia are the majority of the population, in many ways the most important political foundation of the Iraqi political system. So that high degree of unhappiness is very important to understand for the Shia. And now I will hand over the slides to Munqith.
Okay, thank you, Karl. So now we will move to this slide when we are testing how or the status of governance in Iraq. In this question, I think we should move to the next slide. Yeah, please. Next. Yes. So in general, the governance, the evaluation of Iraqis to the status of governance in their country is negative. It's 2.1. And one of the most popular question in polling is measuring trust in different institutions, which is very important. And as you can see here, the confidence in parliament is 13%, in judiciary is 30%, and this is very important thing to address here. As Iraqi, I can see that most Iraqis lost their confidence in the judiciary system. This means that they will go to another ways, like going back to the preliminary social institutions like tribe and other institution or religious institution to solve their problems instead of going to the judiciary. Confidence in parliament since 2005 till now, the confidence in parliament in Iraq is very low. And this is also, I think it's an international phenomenon, but in Iraq, it is much lower than I saw in other countries. Next, please. This is very important question that we have suggested, I and Karl, to test the status of government or the perception of Iraqis toward their government. As you can see here, this question is measuring the control of the Iraqi government on Iraqi politics. And it is striking to know that almost 60% of Iraqis think that armed groups, and by armed groups, it's any armed groups out of the state control, like Shia's militias, like whatever. 60% think that they are controlling politics in not the state. Next. And as you can see here, the number of Iraqis, the percent of Iraqis that thinking that we are going in the right direction is dropping down sharply during the last decade. And starting with 2004, 62% of Iraqis say that we are going in the right direction. Right now, we are almost close to the lowest button we reached, which was on 2016, as you can see, during ISIS occupation. At that time, 14% of Iraqis say that we are going in the right direction. Right now, we are not much higher than that. We are now 25%. And again, the most striking phenomena is that Shias are less happy with what's going on than Shias who supposed to control the government are much less happy than other than Sunnis and then Kurds. And this can explain why we do have these continuous protests in the South, which is, I mean, as I can see it emerging again and might cause a lot of problems to the turnout of the next election. Next, please. Here, as you can see, only 30% of Iraqis think that everyone is treated equally and fairly by the government. And among Shia, this is only 30%. Among Kurds, it's 5%. So it's clear that Iraqis feel that their government treat each of their segments unfairly and not equally. And this is, again, one of the red flags that should be taken in consideration for the future. Next, please. The status of security. And I know that Professor Cordesman interested in this. As you can see, the sharp drop down in the perception of security. This is, of course, we asked about security in your country, security in your neighborhood, security in your city. Here, we are just showing security in the country in general, and you can see the sharp drop down in the perception of security among Iraqis, among different segments of Iraqis. And I don't want to highlight how important the security feeling for any community. By the way, during all research that I did and my team during ISIS occupation of Iraqi's territories, Iraqis who lived under ISIS occupation, the most important achievement for them was security. So they felt more secure than, especially at the first year of ISIS occupation. Whether that comes by different ways, but the important thing is the perception of feeling secure in your community. Next. And this is, man, let us skip that because we already spoke about it, please. This also, we spoke how the, now let us go to democracy. Democracy has a negative also index, which is 2.4, less than the average, which is 2.5. And here are the questions, or some of the questions that we used in our index. I will let it to you to read it, and because its numbers are talking. For me, one of the
on the website.
Yeah, for me, the one of the important things that I am watching and I am tracing is the tendency toward having a dictatorship in Iraq back a dictatorship in Iraq. As you can see here, more than a quarter of Iraqis say that violence is justified to protect ordinary people. And we have different questions on whether they want a strong leader, whether they don't want parliament, etc. The tendency is very clear. Iraqis are looking for some kind of military guys to govern Iraq due to the bad situation that they are suffering for the last 15 years. Next, please. This slide will tell you part of the picture why I'm expecting a very low turnout for the next election. This with other questions tell us that people feel that ordinary people are not able to influence government decisions. And when we ask these questions in different ways with different formulas and wording, we always have the same answers, same results. People don't trust that democracy, the current democracy in Iraq, can give them a voice in controlling the way of governance in Iraq. Next, please. Well, this is one of the good things that we measured. And we have been tracing the trend towards sectarianism in Iraq since 2004. And I can say that gradually, slowly, but steadily, Iraqis are recovered from, especially on the social level, not on the political level, on the social level about sectarianism. That's why if you look on the social level to the percent of Iraqis who would be happy to have a close relative marriage from a different sect, almost 2/3 of Iraqis. Those who will vote, happy to have a neighbor who was or who is from a sect different, 83%. To vote for a prime minister from a different sect, 66%. So Iraqis, I can say that, are recovering from the sectarianism movement and tendency in Iraq. Next, please. We will skip this to save some time. Yeah, also this, please skip it. So the national identity. Again, this is one of the good indicators that we had in our Iraqi Opinion Thermometer. As you can see here, those who identify themselves as being a citizen of Iraq, almost 70%. Next, please. And when we ask question in a different way, we also have a good percentage of Iraqis who say that we are here, Iraqis above all, 56%. The problem that we have with Kurds who still don't feel that they are Iraqis and identify themselves as being Kurds more than Iraqis. Next, please. And here it's a historical tracking of the Iraqi ID feeling from 2004 till 2021. So on Shia's level, Sunnis level, we don't have problem, but on Kurds level, we do have a problem. Next, please. Religiosity. Here, we didn't use numbers to indicate an index because for religiosity, it would be very difficult. I have discussed this with Karl and with a few other colleagues, and we agree that for religiosity, it's not possible, at least for now, to set up an index. Yet, we have a set of standard questions that we tested, and here are the results, as you can see. As I always describe Iraqis, on the personal level, Iraqis are very religious. They feel that they are very religious, and they do believe in God, in Islam, etc., etc. But when it comes to the next level, next slide, please, you will see how religiosity is working in Iraq. So, Iraq should implement only the laws of Sharias. Only 40% or less, 39% who believe in that. Religious practice is a private matter and should be separate from politics life. 80% agrees on that. Religious leaders should not interfere in politics. Almost 80% agree on that. Iraq will be a better society if religion and politics are separated. Also, it's not almost 75%. So, on the social level, Iraqis are very religious, but on the political level, they don't want religious to interfere with politics. Next, please. This is interesting, one of the most interesting slides for me. As you can see, trust in religious institutions in Iraq. It dropped down sharply from 2004 to 2021. So I think I will leave you and I will end with this slide. If there will be any Q&A questions, then I will be more than happy to receive it. And I think Karl will also say. Thank you.
Karl and Munqith, thank you very much. I think we are sorting through the questions, but let me begin with one which goes back to your satisfaction indexes. In a number of the studies done elsewhere in the region, one of the central areas of focus is jobs and employment. And two issues arise. One is the problem of finding jobs for youth in a region with so much of a population increase. And having been in Iraq for the first time in 1971, I remember the population was under half of what the population is today, something people tend to forget about. I wonder how much this issue impacts. And let me just add a sort of subtext to that question. When I look at the reports by the IMF and the World Bank, and they talk about employment, they also raise the fact that out of all the countries virtually in the MENA region, Iraq has one of the most inflated state sectors, both in terms of government jobs and state industries, one of the least productive and one of the worst in terms of sort of merit-based employment. So I wonder if any of this helps explain some of the factors at the start of your presentation.
Munqith, if you don't mind me jumping in on that. I mean, one of the things that we've seen in our research is that there's a profound sense that jobs and incomes are not allocated fairly, that political connections matter more than merit, and that the present political system and the way things are divided by the parties make people feel like they don't really matter and that the system needs to go. And this is why you see such strong opinion among so many Iraqis, particularly younger people, that say throw the whole system out because they just don't see prospects for themselves. Because if they don't have the political connections, then they see very dim prospects for their futures.
Yeah.
Munqith, did you have any further comment?
I fully agree with the interpretation of and the numbers of IMF and the World Bank. Unemployment is one of the top issues. During the first decade after the invasion, unemployment always in the fourth or fifth top priorities of Iraqis. During the last decades, the unemployment issue jumped to be number one with corruption. So at one point, we have corruption as the top concern. At the next month, we have the unemployment as the top concern for Iraqis. One of the things that I noticed during the last 2 years after what has been called October uprising in Iraq, which started on October 2019 and is still till now, that most of those who participated were Iraqis under 25 years old. And a large portion of them are university graduated people. And if I look to the numbers, the unemployment among young Iraqis, for instance, among women, it jumped to almost 50%. Among university graduate people, almost 40%. So this explains partially why young Iraqis, and especially in the South, are feeling unhappy and they want a better future as they express it in their announced slogan. So yes, I think what you just mentioned is very important. And Karl, if I may, to suggest that for the next round, I think we should include something about employment in our index. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question that has come up is why are Shiites so dissatisfied? But let me expand a little on that question. I think it is possible to come away looking at these numbers and assume that this is somehow a case where Sunnis are united, Kurds are united, and Shiites are united. I think you've raised indications that the Shiites are actually deeply divided inside the Iraqi Shiites. Certainly, the Kurdish movement is politically deeply divided and somehow, or at least recently, becoming more violent in terms of Kurdish interactions with Kurds. So I wonder if you could sort of go into a little more depth on what the tensions are within Shiites, within Sunnis, and with Kurds.
Karl, may I jump here?
Yes, sure.
One of the things that I have flagged out 3 years ago or 2 years ago in an article in the Washington Post is why Shias are unhappy. And for Shias, they have been waiting for, let me say, centuries to take the lead in governing Iraq, as they believe that they are the majority. And eventually, after 2003, their golden opportunity came up. And for them, the expectations were very high that they will live in a better place, better life, and better everything, since they are in charge of the government and in charge of the state of Iraq. So they have been waiting for a long time. And in the first decade till 2009, let me say from 2004 to 2009, the promises by the Shias parties were, we will be better as soon as we can defeat al-Qaeda. And when they defeated al-Qaeda, then we will be better if we kick out Americans from Iraq. And they kicked out Americans from Iraq, as they think. And then they came up with ISIS. So people have waited for a long time. And after, if we look to the numbers, we will see the unhappiness rates and different indicators among Shias jumped sharply after freeing Iraq from ISIS. So I think the gap of expectations was one of the most important factors right now. Now, there are emerging calls in the South asking to not have Shias in control of the government because they failed to do so. And I can understand that, but the political life is not like this. Now, for Sunnis, why they didn't participate? They participated actually in that uprising, and especially Sunnis in Baghdad. But in other places, like the places that have been occupied by ISIS, there are 2 or 3 factors that prevent Sunnis from going to the streets. First, their bad experience with the protest before ISIS emerged. Don't forget, on 2012 and 2013, we had a lot of continuous similar protests in Anbar, in Mosul, in Salah ad-Din, all these areas. And ISIS took advantage of that feelings and found a good incubator to evolve there. So they don't want to repeat the same experience. The second thing is that with having all Shia's militias controlling Sunnis areas, there is an iron control to these areas. Anyone who will go, and it happened in Mosul twice, those who have been or who tried to protest in the University of Mosul have been captured, and no one knows anything about them till now. So they are afraid from going to the protest. On the Kurdish side, of course, we have, as you mentioned, division between Suleymaniye and Erbil, where we have two different parties. Suleymaniye, we always have similar protests, but in Erbil and Duhok, the iron control by the security Kurdish forces will not let anyone do similar things. So in general, numbers shows that all Iraqis are showing unhappiness, but why they don't go to the streets and protest, these are the differences between the different three segments. Yeah.
Karl, did you have something to add?
No, I agree with that. And one of the things that I'm curious about and will be exploring in the future is the rate of reconstruction in some of these Sunni areas is really poor, that they're not really being reconstructed. And it makes one wonder if this lack of reconstruction, this emphasis that many Sunnis have on very basic survival, like finding food, finding shelter, things like that, if that's not preoccupying them and making it less likely that they'll actually protest. Not to say that Shia are doing well economically, but typically basic needs of shelter and things like that are more prevalent in the Shia areas than they are in some of these Sunni areas. So I do wonder about that, if that's not an important reason why some of these Sunni areas have not really risen up. But I think Munqith's point about just a reticence to do what happened in 2012, 2013 over again, because it led to such a disastrous outcome for Sunnis, both with the state reaction and then it brought ISIS into the areas, and they certainly don't want a repeat of that.
We're coming sort of down to the time limit, and I do want to mention that the slides that you have seen, the entire set, and a brief summary of the methodology will be on the CSIS website, so you can see and study the data and the trends in detail. One question I would raise, and in some ways I think it gives both of you a chance to sort of sum up briefly, is how satisfied are Iraqis with the Kadhimi government?
Munqith, you want to take a shot at that?
Well, let me say that till October 2020, people were very happy about Kadhimi government. Actually, in September 2020, Kadhimi enjoyed the highest ever confidence rate and favorability rate among Iraqis in comparison with all other prime ministers since 2003. But this honeymoon has finished, and for many reasons. One of these reasons was the economic crisis, and for the first time in Iraq modern history, the state of Iraq was not able to pay the payrolls of the public employees, who are the biggest segment of workforce in Iraq. For 2 months, they have not been paid. So that was one of the main things. Also, dealing with the disease and COVID-19 was not as efficient as it should be. And then the third important factor, which came by the end of the year, changing the value of dinar versus US dollar. And Iraqi dinar lost almost 25% of its values. Knowing that all salaries in Iraq is paid in Iraqi dinar, and knowing that Iraq is importing almost every single thing, from the needle to the rocket, everything is imported, then we can see why people were unhappy. The inflation rate jumped highly during the first 2 months of 2021. The inflation rate raised almost 5% per month. And so that was one of the also main things behind the decrease, significant decrease in Kadhimi approval rate right now. And according to the last numbers we had, the last month, Kadhimi now enjoyed almost 40% favorability rate in comparison with 87% last September.
Karl, we have just a few minutes. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. And among Shia, it's even much worse.
Karl, we have just a few minutes left. Do you have a final comment?
I think, I mean, I agree with everything Munqith said. I think those are all spot on points. I think the one thing that I see as such a constraint on Kadhimi's ability to get things accomplished is he's really not in control of many aspects of the Iraqi state. They're either in control by other political parties, or they're under the control of non-state actors. And I think, even to a degree, some of the state institutions are under the control of non-state actors, like the military. The police has infiltration from some of these militias. So I think a lot of people in Iraq, particularly Shias, are frustrated with his inability to get some of these people who are viewed as predatory and thuggish under the control of the state.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen,
right.
I think we are coming to the end of time. I do want to thank you both. I thought that was a fascinating set of insights. And I think we'll all look forward to watching this develop, because seeing these metrics provides a level of insight which I think there's no clear substitute for. Once again, let me stress that you can find them in detail on the CSIS website. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.